Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode is interesting for a number of reasons. First and foremost, Sheriff Stone plays a very central-ish role in this one. So he's a kind of. This is probably one of his bigger appearances in the episode to date. He, for most of his other appearances up until now, have just been he shows up, says one or two lines in one or two different scenes, and he leaves. Here, he's a very major character and is very central to the whole mystery of what's going on. But yeah, this episode is interesting in that it is the episode where they formally start calling themselves Mr. Inc., which kind of contradicts what happened in the last episode, although Mr. E was most likely just kind of calling them Mystery Inc. because it reminds them of Mr. Inc. I'm trying to explain some stuff away, but yeah, this episode is kind of interesting in that Mr. Inc. kind of has a bit of a team-working issue in this episode, which kind of parallels the villain of the episode as well. So yeah, overall there's a lot of parallels in this one. But in case the episode starts off with Sheriff Stone and Mayor Fred Jones Sr. At a tiki bar that Fred Jones Sr. has since put in the money to actually open up and raise and create. And Sheriff Stone takes the opportunity to praise his boss for the thing he's made. Pointing out that that he didn't believe in it at first, but now having seen it firsthand, feels it's a very good addition to the town. And Mayor Fred Sr. agrees with him, pointing out that it's just his first step of many to actually make the town into a tourist trap. Basically, he wants to make it so that everybody comes in. And it's a place where everybody wants to spend their money and kind of just makes as much money on the town as possible. That's basically what he's trying to do. And the fact that he set up a tiki bar very much is very much helpful with that as well. Also, there's a song in here. I forget the actual name of the song. I'll put it down on the bottom screen. But there's a song being sung by a woman. I have her name open as well, but by a woman named Trini Lee, who only appears in this episode according to my wit list, but she only appears in this one episode and then never again, and she's singing the song. But in any case, as Mayor Jones Sr. actually also praises Sheriff Stone for actually keeping the whole town quiet and peaceful. A giant monster actually winds up barging through the tiki bar and starts smashing it to pieces and completely destroys it before leaving. And it's such an impressive spectacle that Sheriff Stone, believing it was actually part of the act and not fully understanding that Fred Jones Sr. was completely oblivious to it, declares that was the coolest thing he ever saw, and hopes that Fred Sr. has insurance on the building because he wants to see it again. But in case, it then cuts to Scooby at Rogers Manor, and he's looking for Shaggy and has no idea where to find him. He notes that there's a record playing an advertisement on the thing for an insurance company. And also believes he sees Shaggy in the bed, but then he pulls down the sheets and reveals that it's actually just Harry, the ventriloquist dummy from a couple of episodes ago, which Shaggy apparently got back from evidence. Apparently, that was a thing that happened in the background of the episode. His ventriloquist dummy got possessed for evidence, and apparently was returned to him once they actually wound up filing out all the paperwork. It was just returned to him, but. In case not finding him in the house, Scooby then proceeds to actually go downstairs and go look for him in the yard, and eventually does hear him fooling around with Velma, although he doesn't fully understand what he's hearing at first. But he does wind up barging through the hedge in the yard, and with Velma and Shaggy just being annoyed that Scooby just barged in on them. And it's at this point where things get a little bit nutty. So. Yeah, this episode. So yeah, it's been a thread throughout the episode that there's kind of I don't know how, I don't know how, and I'm not going to try and even begin to logic this out, but there's been a bit of a love triangle between Scooby, Shaggy, and Velma, and I can't really say I'm comfortable with it. It's a very weird dynamic. It's very much a very weird dynamic for the show to have taken, but in case Scooby barges in and is annoyed about what he thinks he saw with going on with Shaggy, and then proceeds to ask Shaggy if he's quote unquote cheating on him, which Shaggy points out is ridiculous since obviously Shaggy is his dog and his best friend. But Velma merely interrupts him, pointing out that he needs to come clean about what's actually going on between them, and it's at this point. So Shaggy kind of very wishy-washily explains how he's kind of dating Velma, and he's going to try and spend an equal amount of time with both of them if he can, which upsets Scooby very, very greatly, to the point where where they get into the mystery machine, and he's still very much sobbing and blubbering, and Fred and Daphne have no idea what to actually deal with, but they're just in the mystery machine, and they're just trying to cope with what exactly is going on. Obviously, Velma is trying to point out that obviously Scooby is being a bit of a big baby about what's going on, but Scooby's being completely in denial about it and is just sobbing inconsolably because honestly, he apparently his feelings for Shaggy were apparently romantic in nature, and that was just an avenue that the show decided to go with. But in any case, they do eventually arrive at the Tiki Bar, and Scooby, Shaggy, and Velma are initially reluctant to get out, with Fred even trying to be like, okay, let's go, we need to get out, we need to investigate this mystery now, but then they just decide to just sit there for a couple more minutes while the rest of the group actually works things out. But eventually they do get out, and the first person they actually run into is Sheriff Stone, who kind of points out that nothing really happened out of the ordinary. With Fred pointing out pointing out that he wants to know all the details about what happened, and while Sheriff Stone tries to play coy and tries to hide the fact that he saw something cool, the fact of the matter is that he's actually chomping at the bit to tell Mystery Inc. about what he saw, and sure enough, he tells them that he saw a large green creature that he believes to be some sort of alien primate from outer space. So yeah, he's actually the one who actually coined the term Humungonaut, because that's what he believes the species of alien that he's seeing are called. But he also points out that he's just happy that he's just happy that it's only the one. But then a second Humungonaut, a red one, actually winds up bursting through the building across the street and starts tearing it up, and everybody immediately heads for safe ground to try and hide away. At which point we do meet a guy named Rusty Nails, whose name is very much a pun, and he's actually taking the sudden destruction of the two buildings kind of a little suspiciously well. Very much so. He's just happy about all the work that he's been getting, because he runs a construction company. His entire job is to go out and fix all of these problems that he needs to have solved. So the fact that all these buildings are being destroyed is very much making him happy and making him a lot of money. But in any case, with that, Mystery Inc. then proceeds to return to K. Ghoul, where Angel Dynamite has since finished up playing the same song we heard earlier in the episode on a radio show, and decides to go on a bit of a commercial break, once again playing another ad for the insurance company. At which point she gets out, and she comes out of her booth and points out that Mr. Inc. seems like they're very fat down in the dumps. Pointing out that there's two giant monsters rampaging through town, and normally the group would be all on top of that, and as Daphne points out, they're kind of working out all of their emotional stuff for the time being, and they can't really solve the mystery until they solve the problems with themselves. And at which point Daphne points out that something that her family has canonically done apparently is that every time Nan Blake actually, her mother actually has a bit of a freak out or something along the lines, and they need family counseling. They call in a psychiatrist or some other form of mediator, who helps them work through the problems. And then they apparently just lock her in the basement for a couple of years until something else like that happens. Which obviously Angel Dynamite points out is a really good idea, and they should get on that. At which point they ask her if she'll be their mediator. But she merely points out that she only knows two things, knows how to be two things, which is to use records and be a stone cold fox, in her own actual words. And with that, she then just proceeds to walk back into her booth, because her commercial break's about to be over. But in case Fred then realizes he actually has a pretty brilliant idea of who they can call to be a mediator. And with that, they then return back to his house, where Shaggy is just kind of admiring all of the decorations in Fred's house, and points out that no matter how many times he sets foot in there, they'll never not be creepy. With Scooby just kind of trying and not really agreeing with Shaggy at any point. Like that's a recurring thing throughout the episode. They're just not speaking to each other, and obviously Scooby is still very annoyed at Shaggy, so he just kind of brushes him off and tries to get as far away from him as possible, which just happens to be on the other end of the couch. But in case, as they're actually eventually they do wind up getting a knock at the door, with Fred pointing out that that's likely their guy now. And as it turns out, he called Sheriff Stone, who shows up with a big like a big stovetop. He just pulls it up onto the driveway somehow. I don't really know what's going on, but he shows up thinking that there's some sort of barbecue, with the rest of the group being visibly confused, because obviously they don't think Sheriff Stone is the best kind of person to be holding their powwow. At which point, Sheriff Stone realizes he's been tricked, and proceeds to chew Fred out over it, pointing out that Fred promised him that it was going to be a barbecue, but Fred profusely apologizes, pointing out that was the only way he could think to get Sheriff Stone to actually come and help, and points out that they actually do need his help in working out their problems. And while Sheriff Stone does eventually agree to help, he does point out that Fred's just lucky that his dad is the mayor and Sheriff Stone's boss. Otherwise, in his own words, he would make his Fred disappear, and Fred would just outright agrees with him, pointing out that he believes him wholeheartedly. But in any case, once Sheriff Stone gets his barbecue set up in the house, he then proceeds to start grilling some meats and other things, and tries to give Mr. Ink advice on how to fix themselves. But it's clear that Fred called the wrong person, because Sheriff Stone is not good at giving relationship advice, like at all. Literally, one of the advices that he gives is leave town. That's it. That's literally his advice. And obviously, he doesn't like the Mystery Inc. all that much, so it makes sense that he would give that kind of advice. But when he realizes that his advice isn't really helpful and to them at all, he decides to just pack up his grill and leave. At which point Velma points out that she knows the real reason why they're actually fighting with one another, which is that and then she proceeds to spell out Shaggy's name, with Shaggy eventually putting two and two together and realizing that he is indeed the one causing problems. And then it's at this point where Velma and Scooby then proceed to give him an ultimatum, which is to choose one of them, which obviously puts Shaggy on the spot, and it's also very awkward. And Velma points out that she'll understand completely regardless of what he chooses, but remarks that if he chooses Scooby, he'll forever be known as the person who chose his dog over a real person. With Scooby reiterating that sentiment in reverse, but he does kind of agree with Velma on that point about how he should choose his best friend over some girl. But in case Fred then proceeds to break up their bickering, pointing out that obviously the thing that they need to actually synergize to become teammates again is both a new name and a new look. At which point he proudly declares that they should honor the people that came before them, and officially declares their name Mystery Inc. So yeah, he officially starts calling the gang Mystery Incorporated from this episode onward. And to commemorate this commemorate their new name change, He then proceeds to pull out a box of uniforms that he apparently had made and custom fitted for every single member of Mystery Inc. And, well, long story short, they look like Power Rangers outfits. They're even color-coded. And, they all have ascots on, which Daphne points out is a very nice touch, although she puts it a little bit sarcastically. But, in any case, with their new uniforms on, they then proceed to go out in public and go hunt some Humungonauts, and, obviously, they're immediately laughed at for wearing ridiculous outfits, and Fred is the only one who isn't really bothered by any of this. Everybody else is just kind of slinks away to go solve the mystery, while Fred just stands around confused as to why people are laughing at him. But in any case, Scooby then proceeds to start sniffing around for clues. But he and Shaggy keep running into each other, and since they're not speaking with one another, they just kind of continue turning around their directions and keep looking for clues elsewhere in a place that doesn't involve each other. Meanwhile, Velma and Daphne are trying to figure out where they could actually find for motives, and try to figure out who could actually be responsible behind the Humungonauts. And it's at this point where Rusty Nails once again reiterates his point from earlier about how business is booming, and that he might actually consider making the Humungonauts partners, considering they've been very good for business lately. They've been bringing in a lot of money for his business, and that if he makes them partners, they may very well continue to help his business grow. At which point, Velma and Daphne, out loud, might I mention, in front of Rusty, decide that Rusty is likely the most suspicious person that they've met so far, pointing out that he's a little too happy that buildings are being destroyed. But Rusty completely, obviously hears all of this and even outright tells them this, at which point they kind of just slink away in embarrassment, pointing out that and mutter a half-hearted sorry before leaving. At which point later that night they actually go to Rusty Nails' they actually go to Rusty's construction site compound that he runs his business out of, and also while they're there, there's actually some billboards regarding two different insurance companies that are there. But they then proceed to pull up in that to the construction zone, and Fred tells them that they need to find some evidence that Rusty is actually the guy behind the Humungonauts incidents, and points out that once they do, they can leave. And sure enough, they then proceed to get ready to go and do exactly that. But a recurring bit throughout this entire scene is that obviously Shaggy and Scooby aren't speaking to one another, and every time they get close to each other, they can't bear to look at one another. The problem is they're in a construction site, so every time they do that, they wind up falling down something and getting hurt, and eventually they decide to put their whole feud on hold, pointing out that no eye contact is kind of dangerous, and Shaggy's the one who brings it up, and Scooby reluctantly agrees, pointing out that the one eye but no more. But in case it's at this point where they point out that they can't actually find any of the things they want, and pointing out that it doesn't seem like they have any sort of evidence since Rusty so far seems clean. But then, as they're trying to figure out if Rusty is indeed their suspect, the green Humungonaut actually winds up charging onto the scene and starts destroying things. And in the ensuing chaos, Rusty Nails himself actually winds up poking his head out of his little shack, wondering what all the noise is. And when he sees the green Humungonauts in Mystery Inc., he immediately runs for the hills, and Mystery Inc. actually pulls him to safety as the Humungonaut actually winds up destroying some of his construction equipment and setting off a propane tank, which just causes the whole compound to go up. And Fred points out that obviously this does mean that Rusty likely isn't the culprit, and then proceeds to apologize to Rusty, who is a little annoyed that they even suspected him in the first place. But in any case, without their lead suspect anymore, Mystery Inc. is now significantly disheartened and is worried about if they'll ever be able to solve the mystery, especially since they're still seeming to have internal problems that is keeping them from actually solving the mystery in the first place. But it's at this point where Mr. E, and this is where things get a little bit weird and interesting, although Mr. E is very much a mysterious character, and I would imagine he would be able to do this regardless. But Mr. E then proceeds to hijack their radio and somehow has a two-way conversation with him like it's a phone call, which I should admit is very weird. But then again, it's Mr. E. He probably has technology that 80s technology that we don't know about, since this series is very much set in the 80s and 90s. That's very much what the series is. But yeah, he then proceeds to tell Mr. E to call up Mr. E Inc. And after congratulating them on their new name, he then proceeds to point out that it seems like they're having a bit of trouble figuring out what the solution to the mystery is. And decides to actually give them a riddle to actually help them solve it. With Shaggy being visibly annoyed, pointing out that Mr. E should just tell them and make the whole thing easier. And Mr. E points out that he could do that, but it wouldn't be as fun if they solved it themselves. And with that, he then proceeds to give them a riddle about how they need to look for the signs around them, to add to their knowledge. And in order to ensure a successful mystery solving, and with that he then proceeds to quote unquote hang up, and it returns to another ad for the insurance agency, which Fred immediately turns off. And they don't fully understand what's going on. They don't fully understand what Mr. E actually meant. And until they can figure out, they decide to actually go to Fred Jones Sr. and ask him to do something about the Humungonauts. And Fred Sr. actually does have a bit of a plan planned out, and he actually has somewhat prepared a presentation in advance, with Sheriff Stone actually pulling out an easel that he drew it on. But the first picture he pulls out is what Fred Jones Sr. describes as a portrait for his re-election. And then tells him to flip to the next page, which is revealed to be the diagram for the traps, except not really. It's actually just a big doodle. And Sheriff Stone even just decides to call it Operation Catch a Monster by the Toe, pointing out that it's very much named after the whole eeny, meeny, miny, mo thing, with everybody else just getting it. And obviously Shaggy and Scooby actually decide to stop arguing for long enough to point out that they could draw better than Sheriff Stone. Sheriff Stone is not good at drawing, like, at all. And Shaggy and Scooby are quick to point that out. They go immediately back to fighting afterward, but they kind of break away from that for a minute to point out that his drawing is kind of terrible. But in case Fred Jones Sr. then proceeds to fill them in with the latter half of their plan, with the latter half of his plan, which is that he's going to lower them to the Crystal Cove. What is it? The Crystal Cove. What is it? What is it called? The arena or whatever it's called. In any case, he's gonna drag them, bring them to the Crystal Cove, lower them into the Crystal Cove, the two Humungonauts in with the Crystal Cove Museum, and litter the whole thing with a bunch of traps and rare stuff and a bunch of rare goodies and stuff. And the idea is that he'll lower them in. Make bank on a once in a lifetime fight between the two of them, and then proceed to trap them inside the arena so that they can't actually escape or leave. And Fred is visibly annoyed and disheartened by his father upon saying that, pointing out that his father is making a trap without him, and that's not cool. And with that, he just kind of barges out of the room in a huff, with Daphne trying to console Fred, pointing out that Fred Jones Sr. should actually feel terrible for doing that. At which point the rest of the gang actually follow after them, and they proceed to actually go to the stadium where it's revealed where Fred is actually watching the match with binoculars to try and figure out what kind of traps they're going to be setting, and it just results in a really funny scene where Fred in between important dialogue is just constantly heckling their traps. And it's just a really funny little bit of dialogue for him. He just points out how amateurish their traps are, and points out that they're not using the right kind of materials, and it's just really goddamn funny. But in any case, and while they're doing that, Shaggy and Scooby are actually still arguing, but at the very least they're back on speaking terms, because now they're arguing about which Humungonaut they actually want to win, with Shaggy being on Team Green and Scooby being on Team Red. And Daphne even points it out that it's actually kind of good that they're talking a little bit, even though they are arguing, which is better but still bad. At which point Velma actually is actually running some tests on her laptop, and reveals that she's actually noticed a little bit of a pattern, and that the Humungonauts are only actually attacking certain buildings. And points out that she's not entirely sure what the connection could actually be. And Shaggy just kind of points out that it's almost as confusing as one of Mr. E's riddles. At which point Velma completely figures out what Mr. E was trying to tell them, and after running through the list of things that she's heard about all the things he emphasized in his riddle about the word ensure, and the word sign, she eventually figures out what it is Mr. E was actually trying to tell them. And if she is indeed right, she might actually know where the Humungonauts are actually going to strike next. And with that, she actually pulls the rest of Mr. E Incorporated out of the arena, with Fred getting one last job at their traps in before leaving. At which point they then proceed to go out of the arena and go to an old abandoned shipyard, which she points out should be their next target, since she's been analyzing the patterns and she's very much hoping she's right. And with that, she asks Fred to actually set a trap in a water trap near the I don't know what the actual term is called, but it's like this little water thing that Fred then sticks a net in. And with that, they then proceed to get ready to wait for the Humungonauts to show up, and show up they do. And what we immediately find out, this is the first time they've interacted in the episode, by the way, but what we find out is that the red and green Humungonauts, they don't like each other very much. They're actually not working together at all. And in actuality, they actually start punching each other and getting into a fight, and start wrecking all the surrounding building behind them in the ensuing chaos, which is kind of what their plan was, but it's not as coordinated or planned out as it otherwise would have been if they had been operating alone. So yeah, while they do destroy a bunch of buildings and stuff, they actually aren't really focusing on doing that, and are more so trying to beat each other up instead. But eventually they do wind up landing in the water trap where Fred's trap is, and at which point Fred winds up activating it and winds up trapping them. With Velma pointing out that might be the first time one of Fred's traps has actually worked. And okay, I feel that's actually a little bit mean, I should point out, because I should mention, physically, all of Fred's traps have worked up until this point. They've just captured the wrong person. So yeah, well, at least, half of them have, and half of them haven't worked correctly. It's just, all of Fred's traps have worked. It's just that for various reasons, his either his math was off, or somebody sabotaged his trap. There was a couple of traps in there that have actually worked. It's not like none of his traps have worked. It's just that, depending on the circumstances, they haven't worked. There have been situations where they've just been broken or messed with, and that's not really Fred's fault. But in any case, he winds up successfully trapping the Humungonauts, and eventually Sheriff Stone and Fred Jones Sr. actually wind up showing up, with Fred Sr. actually complaining about how they weren't able to actually keep any of the money they raised as evidence. And he's very disheartened about the fact that the Humungonauts didn't show up regardless. But in any case, it's at this point where they actually wind up arriving at the boathouse because they heard the commotion and decided to look into it. And it's at this point where Sheriff Stone, finally face to face with the creatures that he had so lovingly named himself, tries to converse with them, trying to welcome them to Earth, because again, he thinks they're aliens. But it's at this point where Velma points out that they're not actually aliens, or even monsters for that matter. At which point Fred pulls up a stepladder and proceeds to unmask the both of them, revealing that they're actually the Millen brothers. And what we find out is that the two brothers, Max and Jax, they were the ones behind the Humungonauts attacks, and we find out that it's actually for a very simple reason: they hate each other. Basically that's the whole origin of their story and why they decided to become the Humungonauts. Basically what happened was, there is a bit of an origin story, but they used to work in the circus. They used to be part of the same act, and they originally made the Humungonauts costumes, then called the Hercules apes, which Sheriff Stone remarks isn't as good as his own name, but as that he came up with. But they remarked that that they were originally going to use the Humungonauts costumes as part of their act, but then Jax Milner actually wound up leaving, and Jax Millen actually wound up leaving and decided to join a rival circus, which caused a rift between the two brothers. And eventually they wound up deciding to leave the circus altogether and decided to go into the insurance business because apparently the circus wasn't paying them enough. Only to discover that they actually wound up both founding rival businesses. And that's the whole reason for the Humungonaut attacks. They were trying to destroy each other's business, and in the process wound up destroying several key pieces of the town. Including Fruit Myers, the Tiki Bar, and a couple of little locations that aren't mentioned, but are implied to be just dotted around the place. But yeah, in any case, with the two of them arrested, they then declare that they would have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for their meddling brother. At which point they then decide that despite wearing handcuffs and having their hands handcuffed behind their back, the two of them then proceed to try and get into a fight, and in a very comical scene, two of the cops that came with Sheriff Stone try to break it up. And with that, all of the mysteries are solved, and with that, the mystery has successfully been solved. And Daphne just very cheerfully points out that she feels like now that despite everything that's happened between them, their whole teamworking and problem solving skills has actually been fully repaired, and as she puts it, go us. And Fred points out that yes, he does feel like that the whole thing has been very successful, but he does point out that obviously it seems like all their stuff didn't really matter, and all that really mattered was teamwork. And it's at this point where they point out that obviously they don't need to wear the uniforms anymore, which Fred is reluctant to agree to, pointing out that he felt that the uniforms were cool, and obviously he worked hard on them, so obviously he was very fond of them, but they were embarrassing and weird and didn't really fit in with their characters, so they just decided to discard them and take them off. But with that solved, they then return to the topic of Shaggy, who has been kind of deflecting the whole fact that he needs to choose between his dog and his girlfriend. So yeah, and Shaggy doesn't do that. They decide to return to the previous question. Shaggy pretends he doesn't know what the question is about who he has to choose between, and when asked to choose between one of them, he declares that he points off in the distance, declaring that there's actually a blue Humungonaut, and proceeds to actually run off, having never actually given them a clear answer about whether or not which one of them he wants to be best friends with / date. And with that, the episode just kind of ends. So. Yeah, this episode actually brings a couple of different things to a head. First and foremost, the villains in this episode very much mirror the fact that Mr. Ink is having a bit of infighting due to Shaggy. And obviously Shaggy is the main problem. Obviously Shaggy is indeed the main problem behind the Humungonauts, behind the whole fact that the gang is struggling to catch the Humungonauts. Obviously, because of his own indecisiveness, he wound up causing a rift between himself, Velma, and Scooby. And that caused like 3/5 of their team to actually be unable to actually function and actually work on solving mysteries. So yeah, obviously for that reason, Shaggy is very much the main culprit behind why they're breaking up. And also, this episode is very Sheriff Stone centric, and I kind of like that because again, he's voiced by Patrick Warburton. So and Patrick Warburton is naturally a very funny person. So especially when he's playing characters, and somehow I haven't brought this up, but somehow Patrick Warburton wound up playing a cop again. He's been playing Joe Swanson for however many years now, and now he wound up playing another cop in this one. So yeah, I think he just has a habit of playing police officers. I think that's just a lot in life that he's been handed. But yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this episode is that the villains don't really have much of an evil plan. They just paid each other and were trying to destroy each other's business. And obviously destroying buildings is very much illegal, and also committing insurance fraud is very much illegal. But they didn't really care because they were just trying to outdo each other and try to destroy their brother's business, which I think is kind of funny. It's a very petty reason for them to actually just go in and destroy stuff, but it does work. It works really well from a whole story's perspective, and I do very much like that as kind of a villain thing goes. But I mean, obviously you don't need some deep backstory. Obviously, characters don't always need deep backstories to go into why they want to destroy things and why they want to see the world burn. Sometimes it just has to be something as simple as, I hate my brother and I'm going to destroy his buildings that he insures just to spite him. So yeah, that's very much what the Milner brothers were all about, and I do kind of like that. But in any case, yeah, that's gonna do it for my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm always saying thanks. So just yeah, be sure to go check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, there's actually 2 ways you can do that. One is by checking out my Twitch. Link is down in the description. I will be streaming soon-ish. We got new internet that we need to set up, but after that, I will be streaming again. Yeah, the other way you can actually help support me is by checking out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video.